Assalamu alaikum. I'm Sadat Nisar with the course E Commerce. If you recall, we were discussing in our previous lecture as to what are the various advanced features that can be incorporated in an electronic commerce software, and we had studied as to what is a middleware, what are web services, etc. In this regard, we'll continue with that. Another feature that can be brought in the e-commerce software is the integration of that e-commerce software with the ERP software. Now, what is ERP? ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. It is a concept using which different aspects of a business, they can be integrated at one place. For example, the accounting, the manufacturing department, the planning department, the warehousing department, the marketing department, information related to each such department can be viewed by the personals sitting in the other department using this concept ERP. We shall discuss that in relatively more detail in our some subsequent lecture. For the time being, the point I'm trying to make is that if we are using ERP setup, ERP concept in our organization for our business, then in that eventuality, our e-commerce software must be compatible with the ERP software. Our e-commerce software must have that feature so that it becomes compatible with the ERP system. Then another advanced feature that can be added in our e-commerce software is to have customer relationship management software. So CRM software, customer relationship management software, its goal is basically to evaluate the needs of the customers. It gathers information from the web activities of the customers, and then based upon the analysis of that information, it helps the managers as to what are the needs of different customers of this business, and then based upon those studies, then some marketing scheme, marketing campaign can be initiated. Then another advanced feature that can be incorporated in the e-commerce software is to have a supply chain management software embedded in it. Now, what is meant by supply chain? Supply chain involves all those activities which are associated with the flow and transformation of raw material into end products, and then the supply of these end products to the end customers. So all such activities which are involved in such process, they are covered under the term supply chain. The supply chain management software tries to coordinate different operations among the participants in the supply chain. And basically, there are two different subtypes in relation to this type of software. One is the supply chain management planning software, and the other is supply chain management execution software. Supply chain management planning software tries to coordinate different activities which are connected to the planning of supply chain. So therefore, where some raw material is to be obtained to manufacture some end products, then a demand forecast for the supply of such raw material can be made on the basis of supply chain management planning software by retrieving some information from the concerned participant in the supply chain. Similarly, the supply chain management execution software It can relate to all those activities which are connected with the execution of a supply chain plan. For example, the activities which are related to the tasks of warehousing or transportation, they would be covered under this heading. Next type of advanced feature that we may want to have in our e-commerce software is content management software. Remember that the companies, they are becoming more and more concerned about the utilization of different corporate information that is residing with them, like the information contained in text files, in media files, in the form of graphics, etc. And their anxiety is that there should be different ways to access this corporate information by different stakeholders concerned with this company. So wherever we want that our corporate information should be effectively shared by the employees, by the customers or suppliers or partners associated with the business, then we may want to have a content management software which can do the job for us. It can provide a greater control, management, and different ways of access to that corporate information. Another advanced feature is covered under the term knowledge management software. This is based on the notion that basically we are not concerned with the documentary representation of the knowledge. So we are not concerned whether some knowledge, some information is contained in the form of an email or it is contained in the form of a web page. Rather, we are more interested in looking into that information itself. This information may be contained in the form of scanned paper documents, in the form of email messages, or contained in the web pages. Our knowledge management software would read all such information contained in any of the electronic formats, and then it would enable us to make an analysis of this information and help us in making a useful business decision. Now, I want to show you what are some of the commonly used e-commerce softwares. You can see on the screen, I have in fact listed 3 such softwares. Number 1, Intershop Infinity. Number 2 is IBM's WebSphere Commerce Professional Edition. And number 3, Microsoft Commerce Server 2002. These different e-commerce softwares, almost all of them, they provide us the facility of establishing our online store with the help of certain wizards, certain templates, and then it also provides us the facility to have a proper processing system whereby we can receive the payments from our customers, we can process this payment information, etc. It also provides us the capabilities of having a proper shopping cart as well. Then there is a term called agent that is commonly used, and I want to talk a little about it. This term agent, it is not agent 007, which you might be familiar with. Rather, here the term agent means a software agent. So a software agent in fact is a program which can operate independently. It can do some autonomous actions in a given environment to meet certain particular objectives. There are different types of agents which have been created and they are in use. For example, with the help of agents, we can do comparisons, we can do counter checks. There are agents which can participate in the bidding on the auction sites. So there are seller agents, there are buyer agents. What we can do is, if we are using this concept of agents, then we can specify our terms of auction. For example, we can specify for such and such items the bidding should be done and on such and such price. Then receiving this information, the agent would on our behalf independently participate in the auction process and it would do the job on our behalf. Similarly, agents can be used as web crawlers. Web crawlers are in fact those type of software agents which can raise queries to the search engines. So if we want to do some research on certain topic, we can specify that topic to our agent, and even if we are offline, our agent on our behalf would be raising queries to the search engine, would be busy in collecting all that relevant information through the search engines, and when we come online, it would dump all that collected information to our system. Such agents, they are called web crawlers. Then agents can also be used in health matters, so they can monitor certain health indicators. For example, our pulse rate, our blood pressure. If all that information we specify, we provide to the agent, then the agent can tell us as to what are the various diseases or possibilities that can be associated with these indicators. It can then raise certain alert messages in certain given conditions to the users. So with this discussion on e-commerce softwares and agents, now let's move on to our another major topic, which is security issues over the internet. What in your opinion is the greatest obstacle in the growth of electronic commerce worldwide? What do you think? What is that fundamental factor which has slowed down the growth of e-commerce? The answer is security. People are very much comfortable in doing shopping online. I mean, they can go to an online shop sitting in their comfortable home environment and doing shopping online from various online shops. The problem arises for them when they are asked to make payment online. There they feel scared because they feel, say that if they enter their credit card number in a text box on the internet, then that credit card information, that sensitive information, that may be exposed to millions of people on the internet. And then this information has a chance of being misused also. So therefore, people, they are not very satisfied, they are not very comfortable while providing their financial information like their credit card number for payment purposes while making the payment for the e-purchases that they do. There are certain solutions which have been provided to overcome this problem, and we shall discuss those in our coming lectures. Like encryption is one such solution, one such option using which we can try to minimize this risk pertaining to the security of our information. Before I take you through some of the important security issues over the internet, it would be appropriate that I tell you some of the basic definitions. I tell you some important terms which can be used in this regard. First of all, there is a term called backdoors. Backdoors are those programs which have a malicious function, and once they are installed on a user's computer, they can provide certain hidden services to an attacker, to a hacker, using which the hacker can have remote access to that particular system. Then there is a term called Trojan horse. Trojan horses are again those programs like backdoors which have an unfriendly purpose, which have a malicious function, a hostile function. But the difference between the Trojan horses and backdoors is that in case of Trojan horses, they appear to be harmless, they appear to be friendly, and in fact, they have a hidden agenda, a malicious agenda. The term Trojan horse, it may be interesting to point out here that this term has been borrowed from history. In history, Trojan horses, this term Trojan horse, used to refer to a huge wooden horse in which the whole Greek army was hidden during war. And because the army was hidden in that huge horse, therefore the enemy, they were deceived, they could not figure it out, and therefore to indicate this deception, this term Trojan horse has been borrowed into IT also, and we use Trojan horses to specify all such programs which are deceptive, which appear friendly, but in fact they have a hidden malicious agenda. An example of a Trojan horse is a program called happy99.exe. This program, if it is installed on a system, it shows a beautiful, nice firework, but in fact, it would be doing a malicious job underneath. What it would be doing, that it would make copies of itself and send all those copies to the email addresses which it finds on the mailbox on that system. So that was an example of a Trojan horse. Then there are the two terms you may have heard of, viruses and worms. Both viruses and worms represent those malicious, hostile programs which travel from computer to computer as email attachments or independently over the network. And they also aim at doing some destructive work on that system. These two terms, viruses and worms, they are often used interchangeably, although there is a slight difference between the two. One major difference is that viruses, they do not get activated on their own. They require some human action to activate them. Like if there is a virus in an email attachment, unless you open that email attachment, that virus would not be activated and it would not do the harm till then. On the other hand, the worms are those programs, those hostile programs, which replicate themselves, which spread on their own, and they do not require any human action for their spread. Like if a worm is installed on your computer machine, what that worm can do is that it would find different email addresses in the email address books, and it would send copies of itself to all those email addresses. And in this fashion, it would spread tremendously on the internet, and it would travel from computer to computer in a very speedy manner. Another difference between viruses and worms is that the viruses modify existing programs. On the other hand, worms, they do not modify such programs. Rather, the worms are used to install or drop viruses or backdoors on systems to which they visit. So these two fundamental differences have to be kept in mind if we are going to differentiate between viruses and worms. Interestingly, there was a worm called Lovebug which was launched a few years back, and it was quite destructive. It was reported in many newspapers at that time. It was launched by a 23-year-old student in Philippines, and what it used to do, it used to destroy the files on the systems. It would visit, it would also provide the information like passwords which were available on the system to the attacker, and it could replicate itself, it could make copies of itself and send up to 300 different email addresses found in the mailbox. This worm, it used to spread through email attachments, and according to an estimate, it caused a damage of about $9 billion, and it affected about 40 million different computer machines in over 20 different countries. So that was the extent of destruction this worm had caused at that time. Then there are two terms which you should notice. One is hackers. What are hackers or crackers? And the other is active content. The hackers or crackers are those persons which write programs or which manipulate technologies in order to gain some unauthorized access to computer systems or networks. Then there is the term active content. Active content refers to all such programs which are embedded in the web page, and these programs, they are used to perform certain action on that web page. There can be malicious active content. So where there is a malicious active content, it can cause damage to the system. Like it can read the information about user names, about their passwords, about the credit card numbers, all that information. If it is stored in the cookies, in the cookie files, then this active content, malicious active content, which was embedded in the web page, when it would reach and run on the client side, it would then read the cookie file, and it would then extract all this information, the user password, the names, and all such sensitive information. Then you are familiar with Java applets and JavaScript, and there is also a term ActiveX control. I'll talk about it very soon. All these different programs, they can also be maliciously used to gain access to a user system and then do some destructive action. Java applets, these are the compiled Java programs which are sent from the server side to the client side. They run on the client side, they get executed on the client side, and if there is any malicious content in that Java applet programming, then some destruction can be caused, some files can be deleted or modified accordingly on the user's system. Similarly, you are familiar with cookies. We can create cookies with the help of JavaScript, and the cookies, once they are stored with the help of JavaScript on the client hard disk, they can also be utilized in a negative way. They can reveal the information in the data files, or they can delete or destroy the files themselves. The JavaScript programs, when they get executed and if they are programmed in a way to cause some harm, then they can even destroy the hard disk of the computer machine. They can disclose the email messages, and then they can also delete different files which are available on the system. A JavaScript program can also read the information about the URLs visited by that user. It has got that capability. If you program it in such a way, then the hacker can receive this information as to which are the URLs which have been visited by this user. Similarly, it can also capture the information which a user would enter in the web form. Say if a user enters a credit card number in a text box on the form, then with the help of JavaScript programming, it can be possible that this credit card number, a copy of it is made and it is then forwarded to the hacker. Then ActiveX controls. ActiveX controls, they refer to those objects which contain programs which are placed on the web pages to perform certain actions. They can originate from C, C++, Visual Basic, etc. These ActiveX control programs, they can reformat the hard disk, then they can supply the email messages to different email addresses which they found in the mailbox of the user system. They can also shut down the systems automatically. So these are some of the harmful things that they usually can perform. Now let's have a look at the various steps that we can take in order to safeguard our system from these different viruses, Trojan horses, worms, to protect our systems. So there are various options available. You can look at the slide. One is that we should install antivirus softwares to protect our system. They would detect any viruses and then they would fight those viruses from their negative operation. The examples for such antivirus softwares are McAfee, Norton, Dr. Solomon, Symantec. Then another option is that downloading of plugins from the internet be avoided. So in order to safeguard our system from attack from these viruses, it is useful that we do not download plugins from the internet. Plugins are defined to be those programs which enhance the capabilities of our system. So if there are browser plugins, they would be those programs which enhance the capability of our browser to display or generate the results for us. Downloading of plugins should be done from the vendor's official website. Wherever we want to download plugins, the best thing to do is that we go to the official website of the vendor, of the manufacturer of that plugin, and from that official website alone we download any such programs, because then there would not be any chance of any virus or worms or Trojan horses to be installed on our system. Then newly obtained disks, programs or files should be scanned for viruses before use. So wherever we are using some disks or programs, it is necessary that we first of all scan them for viruses before we download them and we operate them. That would again be a preventive step which will be useful. Installation of a firewall may also reduce the risk of virus infiltration. Firewalls, we shall study this topic in relatively more detail probably in our next lecture. Firewalls are those systems, it's a combination of hardware and software, which protects our network, which protects our system from the risk of viruses, from the risk of Trojan horses or all such negative programs which can disrupt the functioning of our system. Let's have a look at what are the various outside attacks that can be launched against a network. So in the slide you can see some of the main outside attacks and we shall have an analysis thereof. First of all, eavesdropping, sniffing, snooping. These are the type of attacks which provide the ability to the hacker to monitor network traffic using some kind of network monitoring software. So what can happen is that the hacker would first be successful in installing some backdoor or Trojan horse on our system, and then with the help of that Trojan horse or backdoor, the hacker may be in a position to monitor the keystrokes and say if a user enters a password or a credit card number, this information can be copied or forwarded to the hacker and then it can be misused. Then the password attacks. In password attacks, attacker is able to gain access to the network and gather information such as valid users, computer names, resources, and it can lead to modification, deletion, or rerouting of network data. So the basic thing in case of password attacks is that first of all the hacker or the attacker would gain the access to the network by knowing the password of the user with the help of eavesdropping. So it is a subsequent attack after eavesdropping. With the help of eavesdropping, the password would be known by the attacker, and then using that password, the attacker would gain access to the network, and whatever resources, information is lying on that network, that would then be accessible by the hacker, and it can be modified, deleted, or the data can be rerouted on the network. Then comes the IP address spoofing. In this type of attack, the attacker assumes a legal IP address and gain access to the network. Let me explain this phenomena to you. In case of IP address spoofing, basically the actual IP address is replaced by a fake IP address. There are two possibilities, two different options in this regard. You are familiar with this concept that on data packets there are two different IP addresses printed. One is the IP address of the destination where the data packets are to be delivered, and then the IP address of the source which has generated these data packets. For routing purposes, the IP address of the destination is quite sufficient. No need of the source IP address as such. So it is possible that with the help of sophisticated techniques, the hacker gains control of a particular router, a routing machine, and then it changes the IP address of the source on the data packets which are arriving at the router. It looks at the IP address of the source and then it changes the IP address of the source machine. Rather, it puts its own machine's IP address as a source on the data packet. Now these data packets, when they are delivered to the destination would now be forced to send the web page, the contents, to that IP address which has been forged, the IP address of that machine which belongs to the hacker. So in this fashion, the data packets would be delivered to the hacker's machine. They would not be delivered to the genuine client. And we say that an IP address spoofing, this attack has been launched. Another form of IP address spoofing is that where you play with the domain name server. You remember that domain name servers, they contain a list which maps the domain name with the corresponding IP address. Again, it is possible that a hacker manipulates some security loophole, some security problem within the software which runs on the domain name server so that it changes the IP address corresponding to a particular domain name. It can then provide the IP address of a web page which belongs to the attacker. So in the net effect, when a user would type a URL, would write a domain name, instead of providing the user the genuine, the real information, the user would be receiving that content, that misleading information which is associated with the IP address which the hacker had substituted in the DNS. Then there is another type of attack you can see on the slide at the bottom, man in the middle attacks. Here attacker is able to monitor, capture and control data between sending and receiving devices. In fact, man in the middle attack is a consequence of IP spoofing. What happens is that when the data packets, they are delivered to the hacker's machine instead of they being delivered to the original client, then the hacker can modify the information contained in those data packets and then deliver that misleading information to the user. So the user would have this impression as if he is receiving this information from the genuine website, although all that information would have been intercepted. It was intercepted by the attacker, by the hacker, and this modified misleading information was then delivered to the client. So both these sides, client and server side, they would be under the impression that they are communicating normally, although in between there is the attacker who is modifying the information and sending the misleading information in this manner. So these are some of the main attacks that can be launched, that have been identified. Then there is another very important type of attack which is very common on the internet, and that is called denial of service attack or DOS attack. In case of denial of service attack, a hacker first of all gains access to the network and then he sends some invalid data to the system or to the applications or services which are residing on that system, so that these services or these applications, they start to operate erratically or they terminate. Right? So in case of internet, say when the flood of data is sent from some attacker, some hacker, so that the delivery of the website becomes very slow, or it is that website is not available at all for display, then we can say that a denial of service attack has been launched. A common example of that is, you may have recalled that when the September 11 incident had taken place, everybody was rushing towards the website CNN.com to find out the latest information. And since hundreds of thousands of different HTTP requests were being sent to that website CNN.com, so ultimately that website that was not available to the users. You know, the server can serve different clients simultaneously, but again the server has also got certain limit. So when you cross that limit, then the server is no longer in a position to supply you the web pages to serve you. So therefore, whenever there are thousands of different HTTP requests which are targeted to a server machine in a given time, then it can lead that server to overload and to terminate. We can say that the server is no longer in a position to serve to the users in this scenario. Then denial of service attack, as I mentioned, is typically launched to take down the websites on the internet. So if thousands of HTTP requests are simultaneously sent to a particular website, to a particular server, then that server can choke down. I recall here an example in early 2000 somewhere. The hackers launched denial of service attack against some of the very high profile e-commerce sites like Amazon.com, Yahoo.com, etc. And the result was that these sites were not available for display, for view to the genuine users. So this plan was deliberately hatched, was deliberately prepared by the hackers. And what they did, they arranged hundreds of different computer machines and they loaded certain specific software in those computer machines, which used to generate thousands of different HTTP requests in a unit time to particular websites. And when these requests, they were transmitted to those web servers carrying those websites, the web server machines, they were not in a position to satisfy the genuine requests of genuine users because they were busy in processing those HTTP requests. So again, we can say that a denial of service attack was then launched. Then another common example of a denial of service attack is in the modern warfare. You may have noticed that the informational propaganda that sometimes become very important. So what the enemies, they can do is that they launch this denial of service attack against those websites which are transmitting certain information which is harmful or which is not useful for the mission of a particular party. So in this fashion, the denial of service attack can be made use of to launch your informational propaganda in a better way. Then another example which comes to my mind is a few years back, there was a DOS attack which was reported, and that basically relied upon a bug in the internet routing tables. So there was some bug, some electronic disorder in the software of the routers, and capitalizing upon that, repeated HTTP requests were generated from hundreds of different computer machines in a second, and then that caused certain websites to be choked and certain web servers were not able to satisfy the genuine request of the clients. There is also a term called distributed denial of service attack. In distributed denial of service attack, what we can do is that the machines which have been compromised on account of denial of service attack, we make use of those compromised machines to launch further DOS attacks. In order to prevent a denial of service attack, there are different steps, different measures that we can take. One is that we should install firewalls. So firewalls are those devices which reduce the risk of a denial of service attack. Then we can also install an intrusion detection system. And if that is the case, then that intrusion detection system would find out any suspicious activity, any malicious programs would be detected, and then we can get rid of those. Then we can also establish a password policy for the access of our network. In fact, it is useful that we prepare a security policy, a security plan for our business, for our website, and in which we should categorically specify that these are the assets that we want to be protected from different outside attacks, and these are the different options that we shall use to reduce these attacks or to stop these attacks from occurring. And we can also point out that these are the people who will be responsible for preventing such attacks. So all this information that can be documented, we can call that our security policy. It will be a living document. We can with time update that, we can modify that, we can improve that. So these are some of the possible ways using which we can prevent the outside attacks and the denial of service attack. Then lastly, let's have a look at the definition of the term firewall and the concept behind that. You can see in the slide, a firewall is defined to be a combination of hardware and software that sits between the internet and the internal network. What it does, it protects a network from outside attack. A firewall can examine data leaving and entering the internal network and is then able to filter the data according to the specified rules. So we can specify certain rules on the basis of which our firewall would operate and would stop certain data from entering into our network. It would also stop or prevent certain data from leaving from our network. I can elaborate this concept more in detail, but first let me show you this slide. This simply explains the concept of firewalls. You can see that there is the internet, and then internet is connected to a system called firewall, which has got its own special software installed on a hardware, and then the firewall is also connected to the organization's network. In other words, the firewall is sitting in between the organization's network and the internet so that it prevents certain harmful data from entering into the organization's network or certain data from leaving through the network over the internet. There are different types of firewalls. Each has its specific function, and you can see on the screen I have listed 3 different types of firewalls. Number 1, packet filter firewall. Number 2, circuit level firewall. Number 3, application gateway firewall. And there can be a hybrid type of firewall also, which can be a combination of these different types. In our subsequent lecture, inshallah, we shall try to discuss each type in relatively more detail. Let's try to recap what we have done in our today's lecture. Basically, we were interested to know as to what are the various security issues over the internet, what is meant by the terms backdoors, Trojan horses, viruses, worms, active content, etc. And we have been able to develop a concept in this regard, and now we know that what different harmful actions can take place with the use of viruses, worms, backdoors, Trojan horses, etc. Then we have also been able to look at some of the outside attacks that can be launched against a network. So in this regard, we saw what is eavesdropping or sniffing, what is IP address spoofing, what is meant by man-in-the-middle attack, etc. Then we have also done some discussion on denial of service attack. Denial of service attack, again, I repeat, is typically launched to knock down, to take down websites on the internet, and it's a very common phenomena. So we have some concept regarding that. We viewed a few examples in this behalf. So in our subsequent lecture, inshallah, we shall be dealing with the types of firewalls, and then we'll also have some discussion on virtual private network, and then we might have to start our next topic, which is cryptography. So till then, I say Allah Hafiz to you. Assalamu alaikum. We are studying e-commerce and I'm your instructor Saadat Nisar. If you recall, we were discussing firewalls in our previous lecture. I told you firewalls are combination of hardware and software. The firewalls, they sit between the network of an organization and the internet, and then they protect the internal network of the organization from outside attacks. So there are different types of firewalls. I told you that there are mainly three types. One is packet filter firewalls, then is the circuit level firewalls, and then the third type is the application gateway firewalls. The firewalls basically, they can examine the data packets which enter or which leave the network of the organization, and based upon certain rules they can filter the data packets, and in this fashion they protect the network. So I showed you a slide. You can see on the screen there is a firewall which sits between the internet and the internal network of an organization, and it can examine the data packets, and based upon certain rules then it can decide whether these data packets, they are to pass through this firewall and enter the organizational network or not. Let's have an overview of each type of firewall relatively in more detail. The first type, the packet filter firewall, which is the simplest type of firewall, it operates at the data link and network layers of the OSI model. Its basic job is that it determines as to whether the incoming or outgoing packets, they should be allowed to pass through